Good afternoon, good morning, and good evening to everyone joining us today. This press conference is hosted by the Special Advisory Council for Myanmar, or SAC-M. My name is Isabel Todd. I'm the coordinator for SAC-M, and I will be moderating the discussion today. I'll just say before we start that we do have simultaneous Burmese interpretation available. If you're watching via Zoom and you would like to use this function, please click the globe icon at the bottom of your screen and select Burmese language. SAC-M was formed nearly 1 year ago in response to the military's attempted coup in Myanmar. The founding members are Yanghee Lee, Marzuki Darusman, and Sidoti. All three founding members will make up our distinguished panel today. Next week is the 1 year anniversary of the attempted coup, and we have convened this press conference to urgently address the escalating crisis, the continued failure of the international community to respond, but also to highlight just how far the democratic revolution inside Myanmar has come in the space of less than a year. We'll start with opening statements and a panel discussion with each of the panelists. That will last around 30 minutes. And then we'll move to an open Q&A. If you're watching via Zoom, the Q&A box is also at the bottom of your screen, so please do submit questions throughout the event. And if you're watching via the live stream on Facebook, you can also post questions in the comments section, as we'll be monitoring social media as well. I will do my very best to put as many of your questions to the panel in the time that we have. Okay, I'll start by moving to our panel discussion and introducing the wonderful Yanghee Lee. Yanghee is a former UN Special Rapporteur on Myanmar, in addition to being a founding member of SAC-M. Yanghee, could you please share with us your understanding of the democratic revolution taking place inside Myanmar and what the international community needs to do to support these important developments?
Thank you, Isabel. It is nearly 1 year, as you said in the opening, since the attempted coup. This gives us an opportunity to stop and think, to reassess the situation 1 year on. Min Aung Hlaing tried to seize power over Myanmar on 1st of February last year. 1 year later, he has not succeeded. Why has he not? Why has he not succeeded? Why has he failed? Because the people of Myanmar resisted. The resistance to this coup manifested within days. The inspiring civil disobedience movement, the strikes and boycotts. These organized actions of civil disobedience are still going on, and they have been pivotal in stopping the military junta in its tracks. I will give you some examples of what the people are doing inside Myanmar these days. The people have been boycotting electricity bill as the military junta might use the money to hold on to power. It is estimated that the junta has lost over $1 billion since the beginning of the illegal coup. This boycott, in addition to decline in tax revenues, has presumably cost the junta about 1/3 of the revenue compared to the previous government. People have chosen not to renew driver's licenses or car registration, leaving soldiers to stop drivers at random and inspect documents to extract motor vehicle payments. In addition, people have even refused to use junta-controlled public transport. Boycotting products made by MEC and MEHL-owned companies have been ongoing. But the movement we are seeing inside Myanmar is not just a resistance. It is a nationwide democratic revolution. Ethnic armed organizations quickly condemned the coup, pledged their support for the protest movements, and have offered their territories as safe havens to people fleeing the military's crackdowns. The committee representing Pudong Suluto, or CRPH, was formed by MPs that managed to escape. They have continued the parliamentary duties, including formally abolishing the military drafted 2008 Constitution. I know very well how undemocratic the confines of that constitution were, and how it was always and only ever intended to protect the military's power. Min Aung Hlaing abrogated it with his coup, and then the CRPH announced the Federal Democratic Charter, a historic roadmap towards a genuine federal democracy in Myanmar. The CRPH also appointed the International Unity Government from among members of the National League for Democracy, ethnic political parties, and civil society to lead Myanmar through the crisis caused by Min Aung Hlaing's attempted coup. My colleagues and I at SAC-M have identified the NUG as the only legitimate governing authority in Myanmar. There are three tests that usually applied when recognition of a new government is considered: its democratic legitimacy, its effective control, and its adherence to international law. NUG's democratic legitimacy comes from the landslide election of 2020. We have published a briefing paper assessing both the NUG and the junta. In August last year, we found the NUG to have the greater claim to legitimacy compared to the illegal junta, which has none, and with every month that passes, the NUG's claim becomes stronger. The National Unity Consultative Council has also been established as a forum for a further inclusive dialogue with a view to drafting a new federal constitution. Together, with a focus on collective leadership, these bodies mark the beginning of a new political era for Myanmar. And the revolution is taking place right down to the local level. Villages and communities have become self-reliant, refusing to participate in a junta-led system. People's administration committees have been formed, most in coordination with CRPH and NUG. These are emerging alongside the administrations in EAO territory that have long been established. It is clear from this picture that the military junta is not running the government, not even close. The people are. Myanmar does not have a military regime, as some quote in papers. Myanmar has a people's regime that is under attack by a terrorist junta. The gains that the democratic movement has made are massive achievements, but they have come at a heavy, heavy cost. According to Altian Burma, during the first 11 months of the junta's attempted coup, there were 7,686 armed clashes and attacks on civilians across Myanmar, a 715% increase from the same period in 2020, when there were 943. The intensity of the violence is comparable to Syria and greater than Afghanistan, Yemen, and Iraq. In the last 4 months of 2021, the violence in Myanmar has escalated to outpace all of the other 4 countries. Min Aung Hlaing is becoming more and more desperate. As he does, his troops are engaging in crimes against humanity, war crimes, and ever more barbaric acts of terror. We have identified the junta as a terrorist organization as defined in international law and Myanmar's own 2014 counterterrorism law. Recent massacres in ethnic areas have shocked the international community, including the horrific Christmas Eve massacre that left many dead. The international community, therefore, cannot continue to leave the Myanmar people to confront Min Aung Hlaing's terrorist junta alone. The international community needs to implement the 3-cut strategy that we at SAC-M have been emphasizing without further delay. Cut the weapons, cut the cash, cut the impunity. Recently, we have finally been hearing of positive movements. Chevron and TotalEnergies have decided to back out of Myanmar. Woodside just today decided to withdraw from Myanmar. The US issued an advisory of heightened risks associated with doing business in Myanmar, particularly with the military, because it is, I will quote them, undermining democratic processes and the rule of law, etc., unquote. I would like to end by suggesting one more area for targeted sanctions that can help the people of Myanmar and protect exploitation of valuable Myanmar's natural resources. Despite the various sanctions imposed, the US, EU, and UK still imports more than $34 million US worth of timber. I thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Yanghee. You mentioned the protests that we witnessed in the early days of the coup. I don't know if anyone could have predicted just how difficult this struggle would be for the Myanmar people, or where we would be 1 year later. Can you give us your assessment of where you think things will be in a year's time from now?
If you asked that question to me 6 months ago, I would have responded with a negative outlook. However, of course, it's very hard to predict, but I have a more positive outlook now, 1 year on into the attempted coup. And I'd like to endorse what the NUG Prime Minister has said, that he believes the revolution will succeed within the next year. And that's based on his experience with the EAOs.
Thank you. You also mentioned, Yanghee, that the movement and the revolution taking place inside the country is nationwide. It's not that long ago that there were demonstrations in Yangon in support of Aung San Suu Kyi's defense of the military after the genocidal atrocities committed against the Rohingya.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell us what, if anything, has changed since then, in your view, and how inclusive do you believe this movement really is?
Well, in the past, as you rightly said, that was a very important period where we can see with serious failures of NLD government and the international community to hold the military to account. We have seen under the watch of the international community, the genocide against the Rohingyas took place in 2016 and to a greater degree in 2017. The inclusion of Rohingya in this movement is critically important to the movement. I wondered if what this movement stands for. Does this movement stand for human rights, equality, and justice? And I think this is what the people are calling for, that we want human rights, equality, and justice once and for all for Myanmar. And the inclusiveness of Rohingya community or people in this movement is yet to unfold, I hope. I hope we can see that the NUG will take a more inclusive approach. Currently, there is only one advisor to the cabinet level, and I'd like to see more Rohingya taking place in the very important decision-making process of framing the future of Myanmar. We know of very capable and very outspoken Rohingya who definitely, and the young Rohingya generation, who definitely needs to have a say in the formation of a new Myanmar.
Thank you, Yanghee. Let's move on now to speak about ASEAN, which, as we know, for better or for worse, has a very important role to play as part of the international system's response to Myanmar. Our next panelist is SAC-M founding member and former chair of the UN Independent International Fact-Finding Mission on Myanmar, the distinguished Marzuki Darusman. Marzuki, could you please give us your thoughts on ASEAN's response to the crisis and what we can expect in the coming months?
Thank you, Isabel, and thank you for the introduction. Just to go back to 1 year ago, we were holding our breath as of the 1st of February when the coup took place, how ASEAN would react to that. And it was only in April, a few months after that, that ASEAN definitely came out with a joint position, which is well known, came out in a form of a 5-point consensus on how to break through the impasse within Myanmar post-coup by the Tatmadaw on the pretext that the 2020 elections were fraudulent, which is, of course, a total misrepresentation of the facts on the ground. It was a crowning achievement of the democracy movement in Myanmar after so many years, and the testimony of the resolve of the people that there is no going back. And the coup, of course, triggered a nationwide response that has not been seen before in any way on that scale, and has, of course, took the junta fully by surprise. Min Aung Hlaing primarily, in spite of the way he has been handling the crisis since 2017 with regard to the exodus and atrocities committed against the Rohingyas. Now, fast forward, of course, that the 5-point consensus laid down the basis of how ASEAN would proceed. And it was announced in the wake of the coming ASEAN summit, which then continued on the 5-point consensus that whereas nothing took place in the interim between April and the ASEAN summit, that the junta was effectively disinvited and downgraded by ASEAN, therefore effectively also, in this sense, delegitimated in its totality. Now, one has to appreciate this aspect or dimension in the sense that by issuing a consensus document, ASEAN has waived the principle of non-interference, and therefore effectively that principle has now been breached in totality. And it has then also been operationalized in a very dramatic way by the ASEAN summit not inviting the junta, and therefore effectively delegitimizing the government. You have to appreciate that in ASEAN, governments rely heavily on legitimacies of delivering and responding to the needs of the people. And if there's any diminishing of the legitimacy, then it affects a frontal assault on that government. And this is what actually has taken place. The government or the authority or the junta has now been effectively totally delegitimized, and the status continues until today. This has clearly contributed to the decline of its authority within the country, and the gains that the popular movement has achieved over the past period has been impressive, to say the least. And this has been the result of ASEAN taking that clear stance of waiving the non-interference principle, delegitimating the government, and therefore allowing the people's movements in the form of the NUG, as Yanghee was saying, to gain recognition in the international community. And so what I would like to say is that 1 year hence, I think any evaluation of the situation there would have to start out with a clear, optimistic prospective view on what is going to happen within the coming period. The first optimism, of course, is the legitimation of the junta. The second optimism is, of course, that this is a nation, Isabel, that is in a historic process of re-envisioning itself towards a federal democracy. And historically, whenever a nation comes onto that track, nothing can stop it, even the junta. All the ethnic armed organizations are no breakaway groups. They see themselves, they see their future being part of the new Myanmar. And so this, in a way, contradicts what former Prime Minister Lee Kuan Yew was saying, that without the Tatmadaw, Myanmar or Burma would fall apart. It is the other way around. Because of the Tatmadaw, we have this kind of situation. And the third optimism is what Yanghee mentioned, the beginnings of a pullout of major corporations, a delegitimation of the economy, and the gaining recognition of the NUG in the international community. So we are going into the next period with a sense of optimism that reflecting the statement of the acting president, the prime minister, that one wonders, not because the democracy movement is prevailing, but one wonders why the TMD, the Tatmadaw, has been able to hold out, and that is because of external forces' support, which we can go into a Q&A later on.
Thank you very much, Marzuki. Just to pick up on a few things that you mentioned. You mentioned the ASEAN 5-point consensus, and part of what was included in that consensus was humanitarian assistance. You also mentioned the EAOs, and we saw, I think, last week, 3 EAOs, the KNU, KNPP, and CNF, whose territories have been subjected to heavy attacks by the junta in recent weeks. They themselves recently issued a joint statement calling for a more coherent international approach to urgently expand humanitarian assistance. I wonder if you could comment on what needs to be done and how could this be achieved?
Yes, well, I think that's really a relevant aspect, Isabel. This is, again, another challenge that is facing the junta, and the international community, Myanmar and ASEAN, are all converging on this very issue, and that is how to effect and mount an effective humanitarian drive and relief effort in the country. As things stand now, what is happening is that deliveries are being made to the junta to be distributed, whereas what needs to be done is to shift away from a mere delivery of equipment and services through the junta, but directly to the people. And this may call for opening up access into the country along the borders with Thailand. And therefore, this is the next big thing that needs to happen alongside the efforts to initiate a process within the country that will bring together all the relevant stakeholders into a settlement. But in the meantime, the humanitarian dimension looms large and is a major challenge for the international community, but also weighs heavily on the junta. The retreat that has been postponed because of Hun Sen's visit to Myanmar 2 weeks ago will resume in 3 weeks. It's hoped that a decision can be made during the retreat, in spite of the fact that Myanmar may not be in attendance politically there, but it is a consolidation of ASEAN as a whole, but also responding to the call by the new special envoy of the United Nations Secretary General, Ms. Noeleen Heyzer, which has called for a international plus effort to mount a humanitarian delivery initiative into the country.
Yes, the UN ASEAN Humanitarian Plus initiative, the special envoy's been proposing. I just wanted to pick up on one more thing, Marzuki. You mentioned Hun Sen's visit a few weeks ago, and we saw that during the visit and immediately after, the junta's attacks actually worsened, particularly in the southeast. We saw that the state capital of Karenni, Kaya State, Loipor, was bombed and half of the population was forced to flee. The Karenni National Progressive Party had joined that statement that I referred to, which called for expanded humanitarian assistance. The statement also called for a no-fly zone in light of these aerial bombardments that have been taking place across the country at the hands of the junta. Is that something that's possible? Could we see a no-fly zone imposed in Myanmar?
Well, yes. Before I go there, Isabel, I might add that the effort to address the humanitarian issues, primarily COVID and other related matters, has been undertaken by the ethnic groups themselves, and this is part of the overall development over the past year, where the civilian side of the governing authorities there have gained all over the country, and that therefore they are, under the circumstances, the most difficult circumstances, trying to provide the humanitarian relief for the population in their own way, on the basis of the meager provisions that are that they have. Now, the visit, of course, of Mr. Hun Sen has, in a way, set back the ASEAN process. But we are now seeing that there is a restoring of the track by the Cambodian government, who is chairing ASEAN at the moment, calling for the junta to put in place the 5-point consensus with the provision that if nothing is happening until the retreat takes place, then the junta will not then be part of that retreat. And so effectively, I think over the past 2 weeks, there has been a restoring of the original ASEAN track, and we hope that this will continue henceforth. Now, it is understandable, and as Yanghee was saying, citing statistics, that the rise of conflict has superseded other flashpoints all over the world, that there is real resistance by the people, which the junta has immense difficulty in coping with, and therefore they've had to resort to major mobilization of their air force, and this has, of course, drawn the ethnic organizations and the people to this notion of a no-fly zone. And it is understandable, completely understandable, that this is being called for. and it should be called for. Nevertheless, it is, of course, seen that this call in other historic situations took place under different circumstances, but the very call for a no-fly zone underlines the urgency and the critical situation in Myanmar. So I would encourage that to be promoted, but tempered with the realization that this is another pressure point that needs to be exerted onto the Security Council to act, and to act effectively.
Thank you, Marzuki. We're going to move now to discuss the wider international system and the UN bodies in particular. So I'll introduce our next speaker, who is the brilliant Chris Sidoti, also a former member of the UN Independent International Fact-Finding Mission on Myanmar and the SAC-M founding member. Chris, please could you share with us your insight of the international system and its response, and how meaningful action could be brought about in your view?
Thanks, Isabel. I don't know about brilliant. Good evening, everybody from Sydney, Australia. The people of Myanmar are entitled to feel completely let down by the international system. That's the sad, the unfortunate baseline. In the early days of their opposition to the attempted military coup, there were demonstrators carrying signs in Yangon and Mandalay and elsewhere, responsibility to protect, calling on the international system to intervene as part of this globally recognized responsibility, that when states do not have the capacity or the will to protect their own people, then there is a residual obligation on the international community, the international system, to do so. In the early days, the people of Myanmar expected that of us. It was, unfortunately, in retrospect, a naive expectation, because the international system has simply failed to deliver. There have been lots of fine words. In fact, I think we can say that there has been a surprising degree of consensus amongst the permanent 5 members of the Security Council and amongst the international organs about what needs to be done in Myanmar. Although we see media reporting of differences of view between China and the United States, at a policy level on Myanmar, there hasn't been. There has been a consistent view that peace needs to be restored, that the country needs stability. There have been calls for the end to the violence, the release of all political prisoners, the restoration of democratic government to the extent that it existed before, at least. So at the level of fine words, there has been a surprising degree of consensus. The truth, unfortunately, is that those fine words have simply not been backed up by action, by any action at all. The Security Council is the United Nations organ which, under the UN Charter, has responsibility for international peace and security. During the time since the coup began, the Security Council has issued a presidential statement and a number of press statements, 4 of them. It has not passed a resolution. In fact, it's never passed a resolution on Myanmar. It has limited itself only to fine statements of sentiment, a policy position. And yet the Security Council is responsible for those 3 cuts that Yanghee mentioned in the opening comments tonight. The Special Advisory Council for Myanmar has called for a cut to the arms flow, a cut to the cash flow, and a cut to the impunity that the military has long enjoyed in Myanmar. The Security Council can handle all of these. It can cut the supply of arms to Myanmar, but it has failed to do so. The General Assembly itself has called upon that in a resolution passed last June, called upon the Security Council and member states of the UN to stop the flow of arms to Myanmar. But again, it's a statement of fine words. Only the Security Council can impose this as a binding international obligation, and it's failed to do so. We called for a cut to the cash flow to the military, to deprive it of the necessary funds to be able to conduct these kinds of operations. The Security Council can and should have imposed sanctions on Myanmar, but it has failed to do so. We have seen a far more positive, a far more active response from international business than we have from the Security Council itself. Yanghee has mentioned decisions taken by Total and Chevron and Woodside this week. They follow earlier very strong decisions made by companies like Kirin, by individuals that have been involved in the past in dealing with military-related companies who are now deciding to leave Myanmar. The Security Council should be endorsing these kinds of sanctions, applying them in a targeted way to the military and to military-owned businesses, but it's failed to do so. We have also at SAC-M called for a cut to the impunity that the military has long enjoyed. There are some positive developments here, but not coming out of the Security Council. It's called for accountability as recently as a couple of weeks ago after the Christmas Eve massacre. The Security Council called in its press statement for accountability, but it itself has done nothing about it. Fortunately here, the National Unity Government itself has taken the lead. It has accepted the jurisdiction of the International Criminal Court and backdated that acceptance to the earliest possible date, the 1st of July 2002. It's also sought to be involved in the case in the International Court of Justice that has been commenced by the Gambia, dealing with the clearance operations and the alleged genocide against the Rohingya in 2016 and 17. So the NUG, the National Unity Government, has been willing to accept the jurisdiction of international courts, has gone out of its way to cooperate with the courts in investigation, prosecution, and cases involving the actions of the military. The Security Council could have facilitated that years ago. It was recommended by Yanghee, a Special Rapporteur on Myanmar. It was recommended by the UN fact-finding mission, of which Marzuki and I were members. So action again, or rather inaction, has been the characteristic of the international response. There is an opportunity for change. We need to see the Security Council accepting its responsibility. We hope to see the International Criminal Court and the International Court of Justice welcoming the National Unity Government as the representative of the people of Myanmar and cooperating with the National Unity Government in their investigations, prosecutions, and litigation. These are the directions that the international system needs to take. Certainly the people of Myanmar are entitled to this kind of response. Why is the Security Council so weak when businesses have been so responsible? Why are individual states not doing more, even those that have been most active? Why are international courts not more active in investigating and prosecuting the crimes that have occurred in Myanmar? In years to come, the 1st of February will not be remembered as the anniversary of the attempted coup. It will be remembered as the beginning of the People's Democratic Revolution in Myanmar, the true transformation of Myanmar. We in the international system have an opportunity of being on the side, coming out on the side of the people of Myanmar. History will judge us. There's no doubt about it. The victory of the people is clear. It will occur. But where will the international system be judged when history writes the record of these years?
Thank you very much, Chris. I wonder if I could ask about something that SAC-M did last year, actually, towards the end of last year. SAC-M has identified the junta as a terrorist organization. And I wondered if you can tell us why this is important, and also considering that the junta refers to CRPH, the NUG, and PDFs as terrorist organizations?
This is important because it's another area in which Security Council intervention is required. We don't throw around words like terrorism and terrorist organization. For us, these are not rhetorical devices. We are independent international experts, and we base our work on law. We've examined the activities of the junta in Myanmar against international definitions of terrorism. We have found first that the military is intentionally acting, taking hostages, causing death, causing serious injuries to members of the general population, using violence against the general population for the attainment of a political purpose. That is to terrorize people into accepting military rule. We have found that the intentional actions by the military are designed to provoke a state of terror in the general population and to compel acceptance of what the military is doing. We have found that the actions of the military constitute serious criminal offences under both national law of Myanmar and international law. These three grounds are the essential elements of terrorism as defined by the international community, and the military meets those tests. All three criteria are present and identifiable in the actions of the military. So we're not bandying around the term terrorism as an empty phrase, as a rhetorical device. We are basing our judgment on international law. And that means, again, there is a responsibility of the Security Council to act for the prevention of terrorism. This is a clear obligation on their part. And so even though the military may use these words rhetorically against other parts of the democratic movement in Myanmar, the simple fact, looking at the evidence and looking at the law, is that the terrorist organization in Myanmar is the military itself, the junta.
Thank you, Chris. We've had a lot of questions come through on the Q&A, so I think we should move to the Q&A section of our discussion. We've got about 15 minutes left, so we've got some time. The first question I'll put to the panel, it's about oil and gas revenues, and Yanghee and Chris both mentioned this, and Marzuki. Of course, the big news today is that Woodside has also announced its withdrawal alongside Total and Chevron. However, this question asks that as POSCO is still operating the Shui gas field in partnership with MOGE, is it likely to withdraw next? And if not, why not? And what can be done? And perhaps I'll direct that to Yanghee.
Yes. Why has it taken POSCO so long? POSCO International. They are one of the 4 largest investors in Shui gas project, and they have been saying that they've just embarked on the 2nd phase of the Shui gas project last November, and they intend to enter into a 3rd phase. This is just unacceptable. And most unacceptable is that part of Korean national entities are investing in POSCO and have some shares in POSCO International and their work with Shui gas, such as the Korean Gas Corporation owns about 8.5% of the Shui gas project. And the National Pension Fund also has stakes in POSCO International. Now, they have been undermining the democratic process and the rule of law in Myanmar, POSCO International, for years now. In 2019, this is just a couple of years after the alleged genocide took place in Rakhine, they sold a huge Navy vessel to Myanmar. Now, we have to remember that although the situation in Myanmar, the entire Myanmar, is horrific from day to day, but the situation of the Rohingya inward count. What happened to them back in 2017? And what's happening to them currently? There's still over 1 million people, Rohingya refugees in Cox's Bazar, Bangladesh. Many have been relocated to Boshan Shar, which I personally went and visited, and I said that that place is pretty inhabitable then. And still, many people are being relocated, and at the same time, many are risking their lives to escape from Boshan Shar. With all this happening, companies like POSCO International still goes ahead and sells a Navy vessel, still goes ahead into and advertise proudly of the second phase of the shale gas project. And this is just unacceptable. But I certainly hope that now, with this week's news of Chevron Total and Woodside, that this will be an added pressure on POSCO International to rethink of what they're doing in Myanmar.
Thank you, Yanghee. You mentioned the situation for Rohingya in Bangladesh, and we've had a comment through on our Facebook from Rohingya youth in the refugee camps, agreeing with Chris's comments earlier that the time for talking is over and that action needs to be taken. So thank you for your comment. We've also had a question through about ASEAN, which I think I'll direct to Marzuki. Marzuki, the question is, what does Hun Sen need to do to restore the confidence of other ASEAN leaders in his chairmanship?
Thank you, Isabel. Thank you for the question. I think we are looking at a very specific period from here on, and that is that there will need to be a firm stance on us on the part of ASEAN on pushing for the implementation of the consensus, and therefore we see now that Prime Minister Hun Sen has now backtracked in a way by adhering to the script that was laid out in April of last year, and that is that calling for the commitment of the junta to comply with the consensus and for the Cambodians, for ASEAN to stick to that in terms of insisting that that take place, and that therefore holding that as a condition for a restoration of Myanmar to a full attendance status in ASEAN meetings. Now, I'm wanting to link this to a very immediate expectation that will unfold in the coming months towards the end of the year, as Yanghee was citing the statement of the Prime Minister that the amazing thing is that it couldn't be resolved within last year, but it may take a bit more time until perhaps the end of this year, and therefore it is imperative that we look at the Tatmadaw in its last stages of its existence in Myanmar, with the ASEAN delegitimation of the government, of the authority. There cannot be a more fatal blow to a government when it is reduced to a non-political status. The Tatmadaw the days are numbered. It has lost any claims of legitimacy in any kind of manifestation, and even if it's briefly restored or in its position, there will be no relevant international exchanges with that government. And so it is a rot. It is a gangrene that needs to be gotten rid of before it infects the body politic and ASEAN as a whole. So the way forward is for ASEAN to stick to its position of insisting on a clear and committed implementation of the 5-point consensus.
Thank you, Marzuki. We've had a follow-up question on the oil and gas revenues. The question asks, could the panel please address the relevance of sanctions on MOGE, the so-called state-owned oil and gas enterprise, state-owned economic enterprise, now that Western companies have pulled out? Would anyone like to take this one?
Perhaps, Isabel, I could respond briefly. The Myanmar oil and gas enterprise is a state-owned enterprise and was the major state investor in the oil and gas industry, and also therefore the recipient of income, profits, shares, rents coming out of the oil and gas industry. In the days of coalition government between the National League for Democracy and the military, MOGE was under control of the civilian side of the government, and so was providing funds for the Myanmar budget. Now, however, since the military's coup began, the military has sought to obtain the proceeds coming from the oil and gas industry through MOGE. It's no longer in public ownership, it's in military control. So action needs to be taken. Sanctions need to be imposed on MOGE to stop that money going into the coffers of the military. It's as simple as that. It can't be considered a public company anymore. It's a military enterprise providing income to the military. At this stage, no state has sanctioned MOGE. We're seeing the United States, the United Kingdom, the European Union in particular, imposing a range of economic sanctions, but none of them at this stage have sanctioned MOGE. Now with Chevron and Total, Woodside and others withdrawing, it's long past time, but certainly it's now the time to impose sanctions on MOGE and to stop this means of income getting into the coffers of the military.
Thank you, Chris. And of course, the other state-owned economic enterprises in the natural resource extraction sector have been sanctioned. So there's no reason not to sanction MOGE as well.
Absolutely. And if I may add, if I concur with what Chris had said, and in relation to POSCO is complete disregard to UN guiding principles of business and human rights and others. I think it is high time for the Korean government to impose sanctions on MOGE if POSCO will not take any action. And plus other companies that are doing business with MOGE that are Korean governments. I think through with governmental sanctions, this could really help or prevent the money going into the coffers of the military. Through my mandate, I have exposed the other accounts that the military had privy to. And only about 55% of the revenues went to public accounts and 45% of all revenues went to the so-called other accounts, which was not under any audit. There was no transparency. No one knew what happened to the money after it was sent to the other accounts. And now, as Chris had said, the Tatmadaw has 100% of the so-called other accounts through MOGE.
Thank you, Yanghee. We've had a few questions come through about the ICC and possible proceedings there. So I'll try to consolidate those. After the Christmas Eve massacre, the NUG has said that it has collected evidence and that it will file a lawsuit at the ICC. And also, as Chris mentioned, the NUG said it will accept the jurisdiction of the ICC. People are asking how long will this process take, and what can be done to expedite proceedings at the ICC?
Well, the first step is that the International Criminal Court has to accept the declaration made by the National Unity Government. I hope that will happen quickly now, but it's taken a long time already. The NUG filed this declaration 6 months ago, and the ICC has not yet indicated whether it accepts the declaration or not. This really holds the ICC up to ridicule. It makes a joke of international justice if the court that has been charged with discharging international justice is so slow in doing so. Investigations and prosecutions do take time. There is every reason why these need to be done thoroughly and then the legal process commence. But there is no good reason whatsoever why the act of filing a declaration should not be the subject of an immediate response from the International Criminal Court. My hope is that the court will respond now and will accept that declaration and will accept the evidence that the National Unity Government, that the ethnic nationality groups, that victims' organisations acting for victims in Myanmar and in the Cox's Bazar camps, all of these organisations have huge supplies of evidence available for the court's use. Let the court take it, investigate it and prosecute it without further delay.
Thank you, Chris. Yanghee, Marzuki, were there any other comments on the ICC? I'll move to another question. We have a question about the possibilities for the new UN Special Envoy, Noeleen Heyzer, and what her chances are of gaining diplomatic traction. The question asks, what are the panel's views, and does the panel have any specific advice for the new Special Envoy? Would anyone like to take this question?
Well, I think I'll start off, and I want to give the chance to my colleagues to also comment on this new position. I think Noeleen Heyzer, coming from Asia, from Singapore, is a definite plus. She has multiple years of experience at the highest level of the UN system, so she knows how that works. And she's already started to get a lot of stakeholders talking in the region. And I think that she is going to take a different route from the previous special envoy did. And my advice to her would be that she needs to talk with not just the NUG or CRPH. Of course, she is talking to them and the junta, the SAC, but she also needs to talk with the ethnic nationalities and in deciding her position forward.
Just if I can just add on to that, the special envoy, I think, comes at a very crucial period, moment, where the transition is now becoming more visible towards going into this next period. We might not be saying that this is the beginning of the end, but it is certainly a turning point of sorts. And therefore, it would be good that perhaps by reaching out to all parties, apart from the junta, which is the obvious first stop maybe in that sense, that both the special envoy, the UN special envoy and ASEAN make it clear that they are also in communication with the other stakeholders publicly. I think the junta realizes, is aware, fully aware that ASEAN, a number of ASEAN member states are in continuous communication with the NUG, and that this is a practice that is now being undertaken. I think if there's going to be any clarity and a new baseline being drawn here, it is that it will have to start out on an equal footing, that the special envoy and ASEAN stand by the NUG and the stakeholders and make it known that that is part of their mandate in seeing that things move within the country, within Myanmar, towards an eventual settlement.
Chris, do you have anything to add to Marzuki's comments?
I would only add one sentence. I hope that the Security Council listens to the Special Envoy.
The
And
UN
takes
Special
action.
Envoy.
And takes action upon the recommendations too.
Absolutely.
Well, I think as we've come to time, that's a very good point to end on. So I will say thank you very much to our panelists. Thank you to our interpreter, and thank you very much indeed to everyone who's taken the time to join us today and give us your attention. A full recording of this event will be available shortly on our website, our Facebook, and our YouTube channel. And you can contact us via email at info@specialadvisorycouncil.org. Thank you very much.
Thank you.